Sonic Unleashed is a platformer developed by Sonic Team and released for the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 in 2008. There was a port for the Wii and PlayStation 2, but this video will only be covering the high-definition version of the game. In any case, Sonic's first outing on 7th generation gaming hardware was mostly panned by critics, and effectively marked the end of the adventure-styled games which debuted way back in 1998. Sonic Unleashed is therefore a fresh take on the franchise. The two notable changes to the series are the boost gameplay and the graphics engine. While Sonic Team was struggling to keep the blue blur relevant on home consoles, Dimps was doing a reasonable job making successful handheld games for the Game Boy Advance and later the Nintendo DS. In Sonic Advance 2, Dimps created Boost Mode, an adrenaline shot of speed when the player maintained momentum for a certain amount of time. This boost formula would be tweaked for the DS games, mapping the boost feature to a specified button. Sonic Team decided to take this boost mechanic and introduce it to the 3D series, resulting in Sonic Unleashed being the quickest Sonic game up to that point. The Hedgehog engine, on the other hand, was a slick global lighting system, allowing a video game to have the look of a CGI film, thanks to a combination of pre-rendered light illumination and real-time shadows. The result of the more Pixar-like graphic quality and brand new 3D gameplay seemed to be just what the franchise needed, and Sonic Unleashed was received considerably better than Sonic 06. Still, the more mainstream reviewers of the day were pretty harsh on Sonic Unleashed. GameSpot scored the game a 3.5 out of 10, noting, "Almost nothing else in this game even reaches the level of mediocrity. There just isn't any fun to be had in Sonic Unleashed." IGN gave the game a 4.5 out of 10, stating, "Sonic Team couldn't leave well enough alone and just accept a 3-hour game with some decent replay value. Sonic deserves better. More importantly, gamers deserve better." Finally, Eurogamer scored the game a 4 out of 10, proclaiming, "Compared to Mario Galaxy or Ratchet & Clank, heck, even compared to Crash Bandicoot, another platforming mascot mired in mediocrity, Sonic Unleashed is an obviously poor effort from a series that is still hopelessly lost in the modern gaming landscape." So, is Sonic Unleashed really this bad? Let's dive in. Sonic Unleashed opens with an epic CGI cutscene showing Eggman basking in the glory of his greatness, only to be interrupted by the one and only Sonic the Hedgehog. Just when Eggman thinks he has finally captured his foe, Sonic goes super, blowing up the Egg Fleet. The two catch up with each other and Sonic now has the upper hand, but it seems this was all part of Eggman's plans after all. It turns out Eggman lured Super Sonic to yet another orbiting weapon of mass destruction. Using the Chaos Emeralds he seemingly sucks out of Super Sonic, Eggman blasts the Chaos Energy into the world, breaking it open and unleashing Dark Gaia. With the Chaos Emeralds drained of their power, Sonic is inexplicably turned into a wolf-like creature before Eggman launches Sonic and the drained emeralds towards the world. Thankfully, Sonic's rapid progression towards the planet is halted by a mysterious power, allowing Sonic to land without going splat. The plot is remarkably simple. Sonic needs to presumably defeat this new nemesis, Dark Gaia, and make the world whole again while stopping Eggman from harnessing the Dark Gaia energy for his own dastardly plans. With the CGI bits over, Sonic discovers a strange creature, who he later names Chip, suffering from amnesia. Chip acts as Sonic's sidekick for the adventure, more or less replacing Tails' normal role. Finally, as the sun rises, Sonic reverts back to his usual form and the gameplay begins. The opening stage, Windmill Isle, acts as a tutorial of sorts. There are hint bubbles which can be ignored, but Chip will occasionally chime in. The tried and true homing attack returns, allowing Sonic to make quick work of enemies. The quick step function is added during third-person sections, allowing Sonic to dash left or right without using the analog stick. And of course, there is the boost function, with the meter filling as rings are collected, and the boost button allowing Sonic to reach incredible speeds. After the brief tutorial stage, Sonic is then dropped into a hub world so the adventure can begin properly. Basically, each section of the broken world has a hub world. Thankfully, these are drastically smaller than the hub worlds found in either Sonic Adventure or Sonic 06. As you can see from the loading screen, these are small with just a few branching paths, and locations are thoughtfully marked on the map. The hub world itself has characters to talk to, a shop to buy souvenirs and food, collectible sun and moon medals, and an entrance gate. The entrance gate areas are where acts can be found. Here in Apatos, for example, the first act is clearly visible immediately, which is nice. Windmill Isle Act 2 acts as the game's first full level and gives the player even more to chew on. There are more medals to collect, Quicktime Events, and plenty of alternate routes allowing the player to find shortcuts through the act or find collectibles. Upon completion, the sun goes down and Sonic turns back into his werehog form. In this form, the player can return to the entrance gate and begin the first of the night stages. Unlike the day stages, which were brisk and exhilarating, the night stages are far more traditional. Mostly. Sonic moves at a reasonable pace, though he can run, and the jumping feels similar to just about every platformer released in the 2000s, right down to the double jump. Gameplay elements follow suit. Keys must be located and placed to unlock doors. Blocks can be moved around to reach new locations, and rings fill up the health bar. Yeah, a health bar. In many ways, it's remarkable how Sonic Team was finally able to create a 3D platformer that feels like a traditional platformer. However, the gameplay is a bit more complex. There is quite a bit of gymnastics. Sonic will need to traverse along narrow platforms, as well as leap along pegs, swing off bars, and sneak along narrow ledges. But wait, there's more. Sonic also features a ton of combat. This is simplistic at first. Basically, Sonic can pick up small enemies and throw them, and he has a pair of punches which can be combined to create combos. Defeating enemies and smashing objects will fill up the Unleash meter at the bottom of the screen. Once full, Sonic can unleash this power, which makes him invincible and increases his attack damage. This can be extremely helpful during encounters with massive enemies, like this one. Even better, Sonic can grab damaged enemies and perform a critical attack. Complete this Quicktime event successfully, and Sonic will finish off enemies in dramatic fashion. Finally, there is a block function allowing Sonic to absorb a blow or projectile, as well as allow him to dodge in all four directions. It's honestly a deep combat system with the large moveset, blocking, and unleash mode, giving the player a ton of strategy in dealing with different situations. After completing either a night stage or a day stage, the player can use experience points earned to level up different attributes to either the Hedgehog or the Werehog. With a day level and a night level completed, Sonic rescues his pal Tails and a flying minigame is presented. Since the world is broken into many pieces, the dynamic duo needs to fly to another city to meet up with Professor Pickle, who has the knowledge necessary for Sonic to bring peace back to the world. This brings on a minigame where the player needs to press the appropriate button to take down enemies. It's a throwback to the tornado section from Sonic Adventure, but utilizes the Quicktime event format prevalent throughout the remainder of Sonic Unleashed. Unfortunately, Professor Pickle has been kidnapped by Eggman. The player is then tasked with talking to the townspeople in Spagonia to figure out where the professor was taken off to. It turns out he is being held in Marais. In the Marais entrance gate, the player is taught to push and pull blocks, which is needed to reach the next nighttime act. After this, Sonic and Tails rescue Professor Pickle, and the next key piece of the plot is revealed. In order to put the world back together, Sonic will need to place each of the depleted Chaos Emeralds into the 7 temples. Once complete, the world should heal, sealing Dark Gaia back into the world's core. From here, Tails finally teaches the player about the world map screen. This can be used to travel about the world at the player's leisure, and even speed up time, allowing the player to enter a hub world during the day or at night. Tails directs Sonic to return to Marais during the daytime, so the player can complete another day level as well as tackle Eggman in a boss fight. With the Marais daytime act and nighttime acts beaten, as well as the boss defeated, Sonic can place a Chaos Emerald into the Marais temple, replenishing the Chaos Emerald and allowing a world piece to fall back into place. It is at this point the player is released from their leash and allowed to progress without hand-holding. Beating the day stage and night stage in a city will reveal a boss encounter, encounter, and defeating the boss will allow Sonic to place the Chaos Emerald in the temple to bring the player closer to their goal of restoring the world to its normal state. Unfortunately, the game mostly fails to mention one critical gameplay element, those sun and moon medals I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the video. Collecting these will increase the player's sun and moon level, noted on the world map screen. The numbers in each act's entry point don't actually signify the number of the act, but instead the respective sun or moon level needed to gain entry. On my first attempt to play Sonic Unleashed years ago, I eventually hit a wall where I needed to collect a massive amount of medals to progress, but I didn't feel like spending hours retracing my steps gathering them to progress and gave up on the game. Knowing ahead of time these are needed greatly decreases this inconvenience. A player can quickly scout around each new hub world and snatch the medals in just a few minutes, for example. However, even being aware of this unspoken requirement, I still found myself short 11 moon medals at one point in my recorded run, forcing me to go on an hour-long medal hunt to catch back up to where the game expected me to be. My other minor gripe with progression is having to visit Professor Pickle on occasion to unlock new acts. Near the end of the game, for example, I knew where my final act was, but it wasn't accessible. I had to return to the Pickle, have a brief conversation before the act was unlocked. While not a frequent occurrence, it happens enough to be annoying, especially on repeat playthroughs. Still, progression isn't all bad. In fact, it's downright logical at times. Sonic begins with a limited moveset, but new cities have new shoes, granting Sonic new abilities. The stomping shoes allow the player to press buttons, stomp through obstacles, as well as stop mid-air. The wall jump shoes give Sonic the ability to do an acrobatic wall jump, leading to new acts. The air dash shoes perform a similar function, giving a mid-air boost of momentum, leading to new acts. And finally, the light speed dash shoes allow Sonic to travel along rings, both in the levels as well as the entrance stages. Between cities slowly being unlocked and the items allowing the player to enter new locations, the overall progression from act to act is balanced, well-paced, and void of any confusion. Unlike Sonic 06, where the vast hub worlds and the vague clues made a guide almost mandatory, Sonic Unleashed can be traversed without any assistance. It feels well thought out and polished, except for the noted medals and occasional visit to Professor Pickle. Moving along, the bread and butter of Sonic Unleashed is of course the day stages. Generally speaking, these are retrospectively viewed as the highlight of the game. While Sega attempted to capture the speed of the classic games through the use of scripted sequences as well as automatic sections in past games, neither quite captured what made the Genesis game so memorable. The day stages in Sonic Unleashed, on the other hand, capture the essence of the character to a T, for better or worse. In the original games, Sonic could roll up into a ball and race along as far as momentum would take him, blasting through most enemies without any additional user input. This mechanic is captured perfectly with the boost function. After filling the boost meter, the player can boost through hordes of enemies without much user input. However, parts of the day stages are from a more classic point of view. Unfortunately, the momentum and physics-based gameplay is somewhat lost. Sonic doesn't act predictably on sloping surfaces, the jumping isn't as fluid, and overall, the side-scrolling segments lack the precision found in better games from a decade prior. Still, the platforming is of the basic variety, and little in the game ever requires more precision than allowed by the physics, so it isn't a huge deal, but this certainly isn't the same Sonic from the 90s. Controls aside, my real issue with the day stages is how easy it is to die. As Sonic moves so freaking fast, it can often be difficult to identify when a hazard or jump is coming up, resulting in a lot of deaths. I'm not sure if anything is even close to the awful enemy locations of, say, Metropolis Zone, but I would have preferred that aspect of Sonic's glory days to remain in the past. Unleashed does feature one great innovation though, that quick step. Trying to maneuver Sonic left and right at high speeds has always been somewhat of a pain, and trying to snatch a row of rings in the middle of a path a rough endeavor. The quick step alleviates this pain entirely. Forward keeps Sonic relatively straight, with the quick step letting the player accurately maneuver left and right along the path to snatch rings and smash enemies. Finally, Sonic Unleashed relies heavily on Quicktime Events. Sometimes these are optional, allowing the player a quicker or safer route through the level. Other times these are required for progression, with failure resulting in death. These mainly come in two flavors, popping up after a boost ramp or when bouncing off blue springs. If I'm honest, this particular gameplay element is not something I'm good at. My brain just isn't wired to press one of 6 button selections that show up randomly and on a timer. On my second playthrough, I became more proficient and could successfully get through most of these when I knew they were coming, but towards the end of the game, the timer would still get the best of me. As a whole, the day acts are definitely playable. Outside of some racing titles, there truly are few games that offer such a dramatic sensation of speed like the Sonic series typically has, and the sheer spectacle of Sonic Unleashed should bring a smile to even the most jaded of gamers. It really is amazing. The night acts, on the other hand, are a different beast altogether. Now, I'm not going to judge Sonic Unleashed based on what my personal expectations of what a Sonic game should be. The night acts don't play like a quote-unquote Sonic game. However, as a fan of platformers at large, I have to give credit where credit is due. First, the moveset is limited at first, but as the player levels up the combat attribute, new moves are rewarded. Early on, for example, the player can unlock the Show Hog Ken. This sends enemies up in the air, which the player can then use an aerial attack on, or smash to the ground and damage a large radius of enemies. There are also long combos, which can defeat enemies in a single strike if the conditions are right. This creates moments where the player is better off doing attacks with a large spread, and other times focusing on narrow attacks with better damage output. Flying enemies generally need aerial attacks, but nothing is more satisfying than grabbing a damaged Hornet enemy and then bashing it repeatedly to not only drain its life, but other enemies around it. Now, I'm not saying the moveset in combat is as deep as Bayonetta or God of War, as I haven't played those games, but I'm not sure Sonic Unleashed gets enough credit for the combat system as a whole. Someone could just rapidly press Y through the entire game if they so chose, but that would result in a monotonous experience and drastically increase playing time. The real key to the night acts is efficiently dealing damage, utilizing the block feature, performing critical attacks, or just avoiding enemies if possible. The end result are levels ranging from a meager 8 minutes to as much as 25, neither of which are outside the standard for a typical mid-2000s platformer. Beyond the thoughtful combat, however, are puzzle elements. Light puzzle elements have always been a staple in the 3D Sonic games, but rarely did it evolve past pushing a switch here and there. In Sonic Unleashed, puzzles are often elevated to the next level. This begins with pushing and pulling blocks, allowing Sonic to reach new heights, but this can be combined with levers, which lower and raise platforms. The player will need to navigate both of these to correctly create a path to a high-up area. I will concede the puzzle elements phase out as the game progresses, but their inclusion towards the beginning of the adventure is welcome. What does change as the adventure unfolds is the difficulty. Early on, the player is given a near infinite amount of time to navigate the different acrobatic obstacles. This gives ample time for the player to grasp the momentum received when jumping off obstacles and learn the timing of the reticle needed to grab onto new objects. Later on, bars are on timers, forcing the player to grab onto them at the appropriate time and jump off quickly. Large poles will also collapse, forcing the player to race up them quick and jump off before they break down. Running jumps are also added, increasing the skill required to reach certain platforms. Overall, the night acts are the opposite of the day acts. The day acts are focused on speed, memorization, and reacting, while the night acts are focused on precision platforming and combat. A bit of yin and yang, or tick and tock. With the level basics out of the way, let's move on to the bosses. There are two categories of bosses. The Hedgehog naturally fights the Eggman bosses, while the Werehog battles against Gaia creatures, until the end, which I'll cover in the spoiler section. Anyway, the Egg Devil Ray, Egg Beetle, and Egg Lancer all follow a similar formula introduced in Sonic Heroes and Sonic Advance 2, meaning the battle takes place in motion. I'm not certain it was great in those games, and I'm not sure Sonic Team nailed it here either. On my first playthrough, I found these confusing as it wasn't clear to me when I was supposed to strike Eggman, be it boosting into him or using the homing attack, or when I was supposed to do neither. For example, during the Egg Lancer battle, Eggman puts up a shield, and I thought it could couldn't attack during this time, which is wrong. In reviewing the footage, I'm guessing I was probably supposed to perform the boost here, but it really isn't clear. Every fight works in this same way, having the player dodge attacks, get close, and strike at the appropriate time. However, there are also side-scrolling moments where precision jumping is necessary to avoid lasers, but the controls aren't quite up to the task. While jumping along large platforms is easy enough, maneuvering through tight windows is decidedly not. Still, with more time I'm sure I could become more proficient, but as is, these 3 fights all feel sloppy and for beginners can be ambiguous. The Werehog bosses are more traditional, varied, and engaging. Dark Gaia Phoenix requires the player to throw water at the Phoenix to put out the flame, then move in for melee attacks, and finally complete a Quicktime event. The Dark Marais is divided into 2 parts. First, the player needs to defeat the worm things on the boss's platform. The most efficient way to do this is throw one of these containers at them, which will freeze them. They can then be defeated in single strikes. Defeating them will allow the player to attack the boss. This works in a similar fashion, with the player needing to freeze the boss to dish damage. Finally, Dark Guardian has the player pushing blocks to a designated area on the screen. The player needs to damage the boss so he stops attacking, which leaves a time window to push blocks. Unfortunately, there is fencing which comes out of the ground, blocking progress or damaging the player, making this somewhat tricky. Same as before, each round ends with the Quicktime event. The different strategies combined with item throwing, block pushing, and Quicktime events make these feel a lot more structured than the looser day bosses. Graphically, Sonic Unleashed is a looker. While Sonic 06 felt like a high-definition version of the adventure games, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, Sonic Unleashed feels like a proper step forward. The graphics are simply stunning and still look amazing a full decade later. The secret sauce is of course the Hedgehog engine, which takes the lighting to another level. The goal was to light each and every surface in the game in a realistic way, meaning even areas not receiving direct sunlight will still be illuminated thanks to light scattering. But it's the color of the scattering light which significantly elevates the graphics. In many ways, opening the game in this Greek-like city is brilliant, and the white walls of the buildings will glow with the harsh white light of the sun, green from the foliage, or blue from the water. While the intent is to create a realistic lighting engine, the soft glows of the color actually help the game feel more like an animated feature, giving the game the Pixar-like quality the team was going for. But it isn't just the clever lighting system, the level geometry is great. The player actually feels like they are racing through the level, rather than racing through floating platforms in the sky. At any point, some item in the background could become part of the act, and this creates a level of immersion not seen in the series to this point. Of course, this awesome lighting and level detail isn't limited to the day stages. The night stages are equally impressive despite the lack of a sun. Be it the pale blue moonlight, soft glow from torches, or artificial light from lamps, the night stages are also dripping with various colors and glows thanks to the lighting system. This allows the stages to feel vibrant despite it being dark out. Level geometry here is excellent too, but this should be expected with the slower gameplay and traditional level design. However, it should be noted, nothing ever looks too realistic, and the artists were able to create a convincing world while still making it feel like a fantasy adventure. The special effects are also dazzling. Different rocks and bricks are shiny while dirt or snow isn't. The water has a brilliant reflective quality to it. Things in the background are out of focus. There is motion blur aplenty, and the Werehog features fur shading. Gone are the days where Sonic looked like a plastic toy. However, all of this graphical and artistic wizardry comes at a price. The frame rate is a bit of a mess. A majority of the time it hums along at 30 frames per second. Not great by 2018 standards, but pleasant enough. However, when there are too many effects on the screen, the frames will start dropping, or if there are too many enemies on the screen. The fur shading seems to make cutscenes a lot choppier than expected as well. If one looks closely, they can spot poppin', but nothing too terrible. Seriously though, outside of the frame rate, Sonic Unleashed is a gorgeous and massive jump forward from the game released just 2 years prior. From the shading effects, lighting, to even basic things like polygons and textures, Sonic Unleashed is excellent. The audio is of course amazing. The voice cast is great, with lines being delivered convincingly, with each character fitting their part. start. Sonic sounds carefree and witty, but is clearly a softie. Chip sounds like a cartoon character. Professor Pickles sounds wise. Amy and Tails sound like Amy and Tails. And Eggman is menacing. While some may have a preference for the older cast over the new cast, even comparing side by side, I'm not sure I could objectively determine who was more talented. And let's be honest, I'm probably the last person who should be judging the quality of voice talent. The soundtrack is also of terrific quality. It's worth noting the level themes in Unleashed are somewhat unique. Rather than going with traditional platforming tropes like jungle, winter, or lava, the team decided to base each area on a real-world city. So, Windmill Isle is modeled after a Greek island setting, and the music has a fitting old-world feel with classical melodies mixed with pop. Savannah Citadel is an African savanna, and the music features island-style drums, wooden wind instruments with a little guitar thrown in for extra measure. Rooftop Run is a rustic European metropolis, and the music combines the charm of violins with the modern sound of a guitar. Dragon Road is an approximation of China, however the music is like a mix of bassy techno with classical piano notes. The hub world has the traditional Chinese sounds one might expect, but not the axe. Cool Edge is the Arctic area of Sonic Unleashed, and I'm not even sure how to explain the music. It alternates between deliberate guitar plucks and then transitions into heavier rock. Again, I'm not sure it fully captures the Arctic feel of the level, but it's different from the previous cities and is catchy. Arid Sands represents the Middle East, and the snake-charming punji is a prominent instrument mixed with plenty of other Middle Eastern-style strings and percussions. Skyscraper Scampers basically New York City, and the music blends together the old sounds of Broadway with the modern sounds of techno. Jungle Joyride is modeled after Southeast Asian villages, and the music is industrial with a few island-style instruments mixed in for good measure. Last but not least is Eggman Land, which seems to combine all of these styles into one sinister track. Overall, the city-based themes add an air of freshness to the experience, with modern twists and other tweaks elevating the platforming staples being showcased. Combined with the music, which varies in genre and instrument selection, sometimes adhering to the locale and other times taking creative liberty, there is a terrific sense of scope in the adventure. Curiously, the nighttime stages follow a different set of rules entirely, instead opting for a jazz lounge sound from beginning to end. In a way, I guess the change in music genre does a good job matching the slower pace of the Werehog levels. That is, until the player reaches a large group of enemies. Sonic Unleashed features battle music, which sounds like a large Vegas show tune. Unfortunately, this plays over the lounge music and plays frequently throughout the entire game. The battle music isn't bad by any stretch, but overshadows the otherwise fantastic variety. The sound effects are terrific as well. Every strike from the Werehog, or anytime the Hedgehog smashes into something, there is the appropriate bashing sound, giving real weight to whatever Sonic is doing. Finally, I should note when Sonic is boosting, there is a neat effect where the music almost sounds like it's playing off in the distance, like Sonic is breaking the sound barrier. It's a great little touch and adds depth to the audio experience. Moving along, after defeating the 6th boss, Chip starts to regain his memory as the two characters make their way to the 6th temple. It turns out Chip is Light Gaia, the opposite of Dark Gaia. His job is to protect the planet and put it back together after Dark Gaia destroys it. After traveling the world together, Sonic and Chip have also developed a budding bromance, and the two agree to help each other to finish the mission. From here, there is a second tornado shooting act before the player arrives at Eggman Land. Eggman Land is a gauntlet of a level featuring both Hedgehog sections and Werehog sections, and is by far the longest level found in any Sonic game. On my non-recorded run, it took me a whopping 64 minutes to clear, and it isn't unheard of for first-time attempts to approach the 90-minute mark. Repeat playthroughs will naturally bring down this number, and I halved it on my second attempt. The final level puts the skills taught up to this point to good use. The player needs to tightrope walk, engage hordes of enemies, avoid hordes of enemies, critical attack massive enemies, leap off moving platforms, block, running jump, launch out of cannons surrounded by spikes, jump between spikes, jump off moving platforms, and perform the toughest QuickTime sequences yet in order to be successful. Everything the player has learned up to this point is tested with an increased difficulty, making it a rewarding and appropriate final level. Clearing this monstrosity will allow Chip and Sonic to place the final Chaos Emerald into the final temple, and the end of the game kicks off. First is an Eggman battle, but with the Werehog this time. Similar to the other Werehog battles, the player needs to use melee attacks to damage Eggman's craft, and then clear Quicktime events as they unfold. Next, Chip combines the 7 temples to create a giant mech, and the player is finally able to fight the main villain introduced at the beginning of the game. Meanwhile, the Werehog curse is lifted off Sonic. This fight is honestly pretty lame. It's slow as hell, the controls are clumsy, smashing rocks requires weird timing, dodging lasers seems impossible, and when you finally reach Gaia, the battle is in QuickTime form. After clearing a QuickTime event, Sonic then races through the temple mech on a strict timer and attacks one of Dark Gaia's 3 eyes. Repeat this 2-step process 3 times and the final boss is revealed. Dark Gaia transforms into perfect Dark Gaia with more eyes than ever, and Sonic uses the Chaos Emeralds to go super. The goal here is to defeat the 8 snakehead things that poke out of the shield. It looks simple, and I guess it is, but the camera makes it hard to see which snakes are poking out, as well as hides ring-sapping obstructions found along said shield. Worse yet, the player needs to complete the task before Light Gaia runs out of life. If the snakes aren't dealt with efficiently enough, the player can expect to restart this fight a few times. Thankfully, snatching 100 rings for an extra life at the beginning of this fight is easy, so there is no fear of game over. Still, neither the Dark Gaia fight nor the perfect Dark Gaia fight are very good, relying on a healthy bit of trial and error, feature clumsy controls, and don't utilize many previously learned skills to be successful. It's not the best way to end the game, but not awful either. Anyway, with perfect Dark Gaia properly defeated, Sonic collapses and Chip saves him. Before the world closes completely, Chip launches Sonic through the closing crack, and the final scene takes place where the whole thing began. Chip tells Sonic telepathically he'll always be there for him. Sonic uses Chip's necklace as a bracelet, and the journey comes to a satisfying conclusion. Then, of course, the credits roll. So, with all of that out of the way, we arrive back to the question asked at the beginning of the video. Is Sonic Unleashed really that bad? So far, I've been fairly positive about the game. The night stages offer a healthy dose of traditional platforming, the day stages are exhilarating, and the production values are ace. But this isn't to say Sonic Unleashed is without flaws. I assure you, like most games, it's far from perfect. The day stages are a bit hit or miss. You have to move quickly over water, for example, meaning Sonic needs to boost or he'll drown. However, when moving at the speed of sound, it's often difficult to determine which path 1 mile up ahead is where Sonic ultimately needs to aim for, because it all looks the same. On more than a few occasions, I would die repeatedly before I figured out where the path was. The drifting mechanic isn't good either. The idea is to let go of the drifting button partway through a turn, and Sonic will regain grip and rocket forward through sharp turns. But after a few deaths or other clumsy moments, I just stopped trying and went through these at a slower speed. Sonic's mid-air controls are also a little sluggish, making it difficult to make mid-air corrections. Obstacles often come up too quickly, not giving the player enough time to assess the situation and react without having said obstacles memorized beforehand. The homing attack is also occasionally bugged, and will launch Sonic to his death rather than the enemy. Collision detection is sometimes strange, which again leads to death, and the Lightspeed Dash still has issues a full decade later. Granted, many of these issues can be played around through level memorization, but I'm not sure trial and error gameplay belongs in a level 8 miles long. In a way, I guess this does harken back to the series' roots, where insane speed and low-resolution hardware resulted in some questionable deaths. Your tolerance for these issues will dictate how much enjoyment you gain from these levels. This leads to the overall structure of the game. The player is required to gather 120 sun medals total to reach the final day stage, and 80 moon medals to reach the final night stage. Day stages contain more moon medals than sun, and the opposite is true for the night stages. Now, one thing I applaud the developers for is giving players a lot of freedom in how to accomplish this task. Besides the mandatory Act 1 levels of each city, there are optional acts for both the Werehog and Hedgehog. These contain half the amount of medals, but are also much shorter. For me personally, I enjoyed playing the extra Werehog levels to farm for sun medals, and chose to replay day stages for missed moon medals on alternate paths. I generally ignored the extra day stages because the medal counts were low and the trial and error was cranked up to 11, but there are other ways to farm medals. As noted, a player can find them in the hub world areas and the entrance gate areas. Additionally, the player can buy souvenirs at the shops located in each city. Giving these souvenirs to Professor Pickle will reward game hints and occasionally precious medals. So if one is adverse to nighttime stages, they could alter their strategy to minimize the annoyance. One could certainly argue roaming around areas looking for medals is a lazy way to prevent the player from progressing out of order, and there is definitely an air of padding to the ordeal, but I don't think there is anything inherently wrong with having a couple of mandatory collectibles either. The nighttime acts have some questionable design decisions as well. There is an abundance of tightrope walking for some reason. At first, this isn't a big deal as the player can grab onto the bar if they slip, but later on, slipping results in death. Other times the bar will collapse, meaning the player will have to run at full speed so they don't die. It can be tricky, and the goal of keeping the Werehog moving in a straight line isn't exactly the most engaging platform challenge. The controls can occasionally get in the way as well, making it awkward to climb up and over ledges, and the checkpoints are sometimes too far apart, forcing the player to repeat large sections of these levels. But other than that, the night stages are easily the most complete gameplay experience found in the game. The Werehog has excellent reach thanks to his stretchy arms. The combat system is deep with different moves working best in different circumstances. The critical moves offer the perfect risk versus reward, allowing a player to quickly finish off a half-beaten foe if they complete the Quicktime event timely, punishing the player by refilling enemy health with failure. Enemies become more challenging, with shields and weapons needing to be disarmed before enemies accrue damage. And of course, the leveling up system allows the player to increase their shield count, unleash bar, and health bar, so the player can deal with the increased difficulty. One doesn't need to learn the combat system, of course, and could just mash buttons, but these players will be punished with weaker attacks and longer play times. The grabbing system is intuitive, forcing the player to methodically make their way through tightly crafted obstacle courses. As the game progresses, these get trickier with crumbling platforms and timed elements, adding suspense to the action. At the end of the day, the good in Sonic Unleashed easily outweighs the bad. The negative aspects are minor compared to problems found in previous Sonic installments. Hub worlds are small and easy to navigate. It's never unclear where to go to progress. Scripted events don't kill the player. The story isn't convoluted and difficult to follow. Town missions are almost always optional. The load screens are short. Sonic Unleashed feels like a finished product, leading to a frustration-free experience from beginning to end. While having Sonic turn into a werehog at night is obviously a little cringy, and I can't help but wonder where Sega comes up with this stuff, the gameplay they put behind the concept is terrific. For the first time in the 3D series, I finally felt like I was playing a polished AAA platformer, instead of justifying game design issues as being part of what makes Sonic, well, Sonic. And while I do feel the day stages are a little rough and could have used some fine-tuning, I would have no problem replaying all of these to try and obtain S ranks. There is something inherently addicting about trying to control the uncontrollable, and these are something I do want to memorize and perfect, and that isn't something I can say about many of the Adventure era levels. So yeah, Sonic Unleashed is not a bad game at all. In fact, I would say it's pretty good, with moments of genuine greatness. While it's easy to pick on the Werehog as as a concept, the execution is excellent and deserves recognition. The graphics are truly mind-blowing, and I can't believe this game is already 10 years old. The game oozes charm, from Eggman's new sidekick taking cheap shots at the failing doctor, to Chip sitting on Sonic's head, to Amy hugging a mysterious hedgehog for the umpteenth time. Combine this with yet another stunning soundtrack, solid progression system, and awesome difficulty curve, and a game with few glaring faults, and you have one of the most underrated and overbashed games I've ever played.
Yep.